what's interesting in this topic is that this is actually the first time I speak about it in public. So since this is the first time, and since I don't have much experience, I've tried to look around at what other people have said about accessibility and how they've actually prepared presentations. So it goes something like this. How to add accessibility to your application? Well, the most important aspect, you actually add labels to all your buttons so that people who use screen readers can actually get an idea of what an icon might represent if they can visually see it. Second aspect, how to add accessibility. You allow the user to specify larger fonts so that if they have a hard time reading, they can actually get bigger text. And then the third aspect, and that is my experience, if you try to do it that way, it's gonna blow up in your face. Here's an actual screenshot. There's an icon on the top left to open the navigation drawer. We traditionally call it the hamburger icon. The first thing is that if you cannot see the icon, if you're just being told this is the hamburger, that doesn't mean anything. Worst case, this is a real case example. This is a screenshot of actually a Yahoo application, so I shouldn't be so proud. Where the button ended up being translated the Burger King button. I'm not kidding, this happened. By the way, if there's anybody from Amazon in the room, this is not the real stock quote, it's from much longer ago. Your stock is doing much better right now. So, really what's important here is that we got it wrong. If we follow that thing, if we start to ask ourselves, how do we add accessibility? We're going to get it wrong. We really ask the wrong question. How to add accessibility is not the right question to ask. It's a question that will lead to failure. But here's the problem. What is the question? What is the question we need to be asking ourselves so that those answers we try to apply, those labels for screen readers, those screen sizes, actually do make some sense. So there are some people who are really good at actually asking questions and giving answers. Standards, full of acronyms, lawyers as well. Those are important to know if you're working in accessibility. So a couple of those acronyms and standards. ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, WCAG 2.0, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There are many others. Those are very interesting because they give you a quick view, I would say, of what accessibility might mean. But my job at Yahoo is to work on excellence. And I look at those standards and those laws with a cautious eye. Let me explain. The law is actually set to create a baseline that anybody can reach. On top of that, the law by nature is just going to restrict your own freedom in order to actually guarantee the freedoms of others. So the bar that is set by the law is actually incredibly low. And by that I'm going to mean very literally, the law is set so that if you just meet the law, you're doing something that is so bad that any lower than that would be illegal. Think of it that way, that is really what the law means. If you just meet the bar, anything worse would be illegal. You're so bad that you cannot possibly be worse and still be legal. My job is excellence, so that's not the way I actually look at it. So you can look at those, and you can actually feed your lawyer enough so that you don't have to feed other people's lawyers. But that is the way you should think about it. This is not about building product, it's about keeping yourself out of the course. So really, this is how we're going to ask ourselves about accessibility. Who are really our users? Our users are humans, right? Right? On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. So our users are human. Now, I'm a technologist, so I'm used to working with, especially in the mobile world, I'm used to targeting software that runs on 2 billion devices. We've got 2 billion devices that are built around ARM processors that are able to run exactly the same instructions. We actually give them exactly the same bit pattern and get exactly the same result on the screen. It's incredibly predictable. Why are they so predictable? Because they follow incredibly precise blueprints. We have massive assembly lines all around the world, mostly in China, that put those devices together, very complex machineries, very specialized people who actually put those devices together. So they're very, very predictable. Now, how do we build humans? What are the instructions about how to build a human? What are the assembly lines? We actually build humans at home. We have no instructions. It's not even a full-time job. We just do it on the side. We're amateurs. Nobody builds more than a handful of humans. We don't build a huge experience about humans. So from that point of view, how can we expect all humans to be the same? They're not built the same. They're not built around the same instructions. And I'm only talking about the very beginning. If you think about humans as technology, when a human just, you do your unboxing, it's a complex process. You unbox your human. There's barely a BIOS. There's not even an operating system. Think about the capabilities out of the box. Not quite a box. But barely any input, and the only output is one bit, which is scream or do not scream. It takes 20 years to program an operating system, and we do it by hand. So it is no surprise, it should be no surprise that all humans are incredibly different from one another. And if we, as technologists, start to think that all humans are going to be the same, and if we actually reach the conclusion that we can just look at one human and expect that all of the humans are going to be exactly the same, we're going to be wrong. We're going to be right for one human, and we're going to be wrong for about 7 billion others. That is not who we are as humans. And so as technologists, we cannot assume that humans are like machines, that we cannot assume that humans are predictable. So let's look at a few ways, how humans are unique. We're literally individually unique. In fact, as a society, we trust that we're unique. You can ask identical twins how they feel about either DNA testing or face recognition. They're going to tell you, well, no, we're too close together. Everybody assumes that we're different, and we identical twins are actually too close. So it's normal for us, it's normal for us humans, it's normal for us as a society to assume that everybody is different. In a few cases where people are not different enough, cause a lot of trouble. So let's look at a few ways in which humans are actually different from one another, and which humans are actually unique. And since this is a talk about accessibility, I'm not going to look at every possible way in which humans are different. That would actually take way too long, we would all fall asleep. I think we're already falling asleep. But here are a few dimensions that are relevant in a domain of accessibility, and they're actually sorted in terms of prevalence. So let's remember how we were talking earlier about or labels for screen readers and text sizes. The first way in which we humans are variable and unique is actually on the cognitive side. This is something where people are very different. We don't understand the same things the same way. Some people understand more, some people understand less, some people can understand quickly, some people need more time. We cannot always assume when creating technologies that everybody will be able to actually understand it the same way. In fact, the whole technology industry has a bias toward hiring people who are able to understand things very quickly and to understand things that are complex, because technology is fundamentally complex and requires to very quickly. So we've got to be very, very, very careful as technologists that in the cognitive domain, the whole humankind is incredibly variable. Another way in which we humans are actually variable is hearing. We don't all hear the same way. Some have very, very sharp hearing, some not so much. Some people don't hear as much. We see on the photo here the person who actually using American Sign Language, because that person probably, or the person that they're conversing with, probably can't hear anything at all. It's a very common dimension across humans. So we should not, as technologists, assume that all humans can actually hear the same. There are physical differences in the way we can actually, in the way we are. We have a photo here of a person in a wheelchair using a computer. Physical is a very interesting topic because there are very many ways in which we are physically different. It varies from our own ability to actually walk, but that's just the ability to walk. It does not prevent us from doing anything else other than walking. To the ability to use strength, to the ability to actually use fine movement, to the ability to do quick movement, to the ability to do certain kinds of motion. It's very interesting that for people using a touchscreen, for me as a mobile guy, as a smartphone guy, it's very important very interesting that some users have no difficulty pointing to one aspect of the screen, but cannot double click because the speed required to do that is not within their reach. Or that they can actually touch the screen, but they cannot actually get a finger to hover just above the screen. So technologies that require things like that are difficult. Or some users can actually touch the screen but have extreme difficulty dragging precisely. So there's a whole variety of differences between humans that are actually relevant to the way we actually build technologies. Another dimension in which we're all different is vision. Many of us have glasses in the room, so that's already a sign that we're not exactly all the same, right? But vision goes much beyond that. We have a photo here of 3 users who are actually taking selfies. What's interesting is that these users are entirely blind. They have no sense of vision whatsoever. Why are they taking selfies? Because their friends can see. Their friends are used to interacting with them by using their own sense of vision. So why wouldn't you share photos of you with your friends, since that's the way they're used to actually perceiving you? I'm going to go a bit further on vision because it's an important one. A lot of computer technology is based very much on screens, and being based on screens, it means that it's as soon as the lack of ability to perceive the screen or difficulties perceiving the screen come into play, you've got to be very careful. So I talked earlier about adding labels for screen reader. And for many of us, that might be the first aspect we think about when we think about vision and accessibility. But it turns out it's not. Only about 5% of users who have difficulties with vision are legally blind. So if we focus on people who might be legally blind, we're missing a lot of people for whom vision is difficult. What's really interesting to know in terms of vision is that the biggest impact, the easiest way to actually make things easier for people who might have vision difficulties is actually contrast. The second example I was giving was actually text size, but that does not actually solve the real problem. One of my coworkers is a wonderful gentleman called Darren Burton, who used to be Director of Technology at the American Foundation for the Blind. And he had that hypothesis that contrast was more important. He's himself entirely blind. He does not see at all. But he actually ran that research, and the conclusion was incredibly strong, which is contrast is what matters a lot. So it's very interesting that when we think about vision, the problem is not, the biggest problem in terms of number of users is not screen readers, it is not font size, it is contrast. I'm going to go back to the 5% of users who are legally blind. Even in that case, we need to understand that legally blind does not mean that the users do not perceive anything at all. Legally blind can be essentially 3 different aspects. It's the total lack of visual perception. That is the one that, for many of us as instincts, what we think of. So those are the users we think of when we think of users who are blind. But being legally blind can also mean someone who's got very low visual acuity, such that reading text would be very hard or impossible for them. A user with very low visual acuity can have perfect color perception. If I'm building an application that could be representing good news or bad news, that could be a finance application, as I was showing a screenshot earlier. For a finance application, if the top of the screen is actually red or green, depending if the market is going up and down, a user who's legally blind might be able to actually get the information they're looking for at a glance, in a fraction of a second, without having to look at a single character on the screen or use technology to get a single character on the screen. Another way in which users can actually be legally blind is tunnel vision. There is an angle, a visual angle, that is defined in the law so that users can be legally blind and have somewhat sharp vision on a very narrow angle. So they will have the ability to read text, potentially 1 character at a time. Most probably they're still going to need high contrast, most probably they're still going to need bigger characters. So that is yet another way people's vision can be affected. Human visual system is so incredibly complex that the variations manifest themselves in incredibly many ways, which means that we as technologists have to be cautious about that. Another dimension in which we are all a bit unique is language. And I mean language as the ability for users to express themselves. It can be the ability for users to express themselves through sound, through voice. And that can come from a variety of reasons. Differences there can come through a variety of reasons. One aspect that I know is one that is very harsh on people. Somebody with a throat cancer getting surgery to get rid of it might lose, and very often does lose, their ability to speak. It could also be based on people's ability to just process thoughts into words, and that is in that case not just a spoken word. For some users on the autism spectrum, the ideas can be very clear, but expressing them into words is actually difficult. For us as technologists, it means that technologies like I have on my wrist here, a smartwatch that is all activated by voice, or even more and more as we're seeing bots that we see on every website, you want to chat with me, you want to do these things, are actually difficult for some users to use because that requires those users to actually express thoughts into their own words, which is a very difficult task for some users. So we humans are, like you're saying, just along those 5 very broad strokes. We're very different, and everybody is unique. Here's another way in which we are somewhat unique. It's a little bit difficult to express exactly how that's a uniqueness, but there's a temporal dimension in all of those aspects. We cannot assume that a given human who's got their own approach to cognitive, to hearing, to physical motion, to vision, or to language, is going to stay exactly the same all the time. We've got here a photo of somebody who broke their leg in a cast, 2 hands busy just holding crutches. That obviously has a massive impact in the way you can use technology. Try to actually walk with crutches and to read something on your smartphone at the same time. You're going to see it's not easy. So there's a certain temporary aspect or certain temporal aspect about human uniqueness. We're not unique in our own way that remains the same exactly all the time. We're unique in a way that keeps evolving. So we can look back at all of those different aspects and think that in the broad spectrum of accessibility, there are lots of ways, really many, many ways in which we have to think about humans, about people, about users, and about how we are all so different and unique, that accessibility is not just a couple of very narrow recipes that we can apply and be done. The question we asked earlier, how can we add accessibility to an app, is not going to be able to actually answer the very broad spectrum of all human uniqueness. I'm going to spend more time talking about those temporal changes because those are actually really, really, really important. Two aspects about the temporal changes. They can be gradual or they can be very sudden. Example of a gradual temporal change: as most of us get old, our eyesight gets less and less sharp. Our ability to focus, in most cases, changes. I know that's very much the case for me. They can also be temporary or permanent. We saw a person with a broken leg. With a bit of luck, after a few weeks, things are getting much better, and they can regain the use of their leg, and as a result, they can regain the use of their hands as well as they're walking around. Or they can be very permanent. An aspect I haven't quite mentioned here is that changes can happen in lots of different ways. It's very easy to think, vision might become less sharp as people get older. But if we think about the other side of life, and I would say, let's say the cognitive side, we're not born very smart. It actually takes us a little while to get smarter. In fact, it takes us long enough that by law, in California at least, we're not allowed to drink alcohol until we're 21. It's so hard to get that cognitive maturity that until we're 21, the government doesn't trust us to actually do something that might actually impair our own maturity. If you want to think about it, there's something very interesting, which is that alcohol can actually hurt you on all of the aspects that I've mentioned at the same time. You can lose vision, cognitive, hearing, speaking, all of those at the same time with just enough alcohol. So those changes can affect a lot of people. Some of them are predictable, some of them are a lot more predictable. One reason why that's important, and one reason why those are very relevant when you think about accessibility, is that the person remains the same. A couple of years ago, I broke my right hand. I could still touch the screen. I could tell you, typing was hard, and pinch to zoom was hell. And then it came back again. If we were to design different UIs, different approaches, along very sharp lines for different technologies or different dimensions in which humans are unique, we would actually force users through those temporal changes to actually cross those lines and end up in situations that are very uncomfortable for them. I'm going to give you an anecdote of Christopher Reeve, the actor, who played Superman in 3 different movies. And Christopher Reeve, if you think of him, at least physically, was really Superman, and people really thought of him as Superman. And then Christopher Reeve had a horse riding accident, broke his back, could not move at all, lost all motion, all feeling in his legs and his arms. He wrote a book about his experience, and the title of the book is very revealing. It's a super simple title. The book is called Still Me, explaining that even though he had had an incredibly sudden, entirely unpredictable change in his physical abilities, where he went from being fairly literally Superman to being confined essentially for life in a wheelchair, he was still Christopher Reeve. And there are lots of things that he was able to do when he was still before his accident that he was suddenly not able to do anymore, because the world around him was not actually ready for it. And people started to change the way they saw him as a person because of his ability, or now his inability, to walk and to get out of a wheelchair. But he was still exactly the same person. Building technologies such that suddenly Christopher Reeve would only have access to a tiny aspect of the world, technology, is not the right approach. It's much, much better to actually build one set of technologies that works for everyone, that can adapt to everyone all the time. So that brings me to the next aspect, and that's an aspect that I have not seen discussed in many talks about accessibility. Those temporal changes can be extremely situational. Let's look at ourselves. This morning, 9 a.m. in this room, we were all bright and sharp. Cognitive ability is 100%. We had time to rest on Saturday. I hope for most of us, everything's fine. Right here, right now, cognitive abilities probably have been declining a little bit through the day, and we're all feeling a little bit fuzzy, and when you start to feel tired, in fact, your eyes close, so it's your visual abilities that also start to go away. If you fall asleep deeply enough, it's even going to be your hearing is going to be gone. People will make noise about you, you won't hear anything. But that's just one example here. Those examples happen all the time. Tonight I've got to drive back home. I've got a few hours to drive in the middle of the night. First, driving means I've got to stay focused on the road, so there's absolutely no way I can read anything complex on the screen. I'm not even sure that's legal anymore in California. But even if it was, think about what my navigation app might display on the screen. The only bit of important information is one giant arrow at the top that points straight, left, or right. That's about the cognitive ability I have to look at my screen while I'm driving. It's straight, left, or right. In fact, my visual abilities are a problem. If I look at my screen's too bright, that's going to blind me to the point where I won't be able to actually look at the road anymore. So those situations happen very, very, very much. Our own abilities as humans change all the time. We've done a little bit of research about that at Yahoo, and we actually estimate that on average every 10 minutes, things change. Things change for us. And we can look at all of those aspects. Obviously, I've talked about the cognitive aspect of being focused on driving and not having much power left, much brain power left to do anything else. The cognitive aspect of being at the end of a long day and not being able to focus on much. That goes very much for hearing. In the San Francisco Bay Area, we actually have a subway system called BART. BART goes in a tunnel under the bay, and that tunnel is incredibly noisy. 102 decibel. Yes, it's really noisy. What's interesting is that getting into that tunnel, you see people in BART having a conversation or being on the phone, and you get in the tunnel and all the conversations stop. People cannot hear what's being said, people cannot hear on the phone, they cannot speak on the phone because the other side cannot hear them. Literally, you have hundreds of people in an instant who become deaf and mute for 3 minutes, and then everything's back. You can look at all of those dimensions in every way. We actually do lose these abilities. Physical abilities. A parent holding a child, only going to have one hand left to use a smartphone. Try to do a pitch to zoom with only one hand. It's impossible. It is impossible. It's physically impossible to have fingers under the screen, under the phone to hold the phone, and on top to actually do a pitch to zoom. So those changes, those temporal changes, they're not just very rare or very slow or predictable. They happen all the time. Now we can actually go back to our interesting question in the beginning. What question do we really need to ask? So we're going to get much closer. There are two sides to that coin of making technology usable. One side is building technology that works for everyone. The other side is building technology that works all the time. Because of all those aspects, all those temporal aspects about those dimensions that I've just mentioned, because of the situational aspects, there's really only one question or a pair of questions that are essentially the same. The question we really need to ask ourselves in order to become good at accessibility is how do we build technologies that work for everyone all the time? Or, if you prefer the other order, how do we build technologies that work all the time for everyone? And because the two, as we've just seen, are intertwined, if you can really do a great job at building technologies that work for everyone, you will build technologies that work all the time. If you do a great job at building technologies that work all the time, you're going to have technologies that work pretty much for everyone. I can give a lot more examples about those things that can be temporary. An